The alien council chamber was silent as the footage played. A Terran dreadnought, massive, black, motionless, drifted silently in the storm-tossed upper atmosphere of a gas giant. The ship bore the scars of unimaginable violence, yet it floated, intact. A wreck, yes, but a survivor. The Dominion had lost its second full fleet just days before, and now, this lone warship was the key to unlocking the mystery of the enemy that shouldn't have existed. The directive was simple: dissect it, scan it, study everything. The Varn Dominion, rulers of 11 star clusters, had never faced a force that didn't retreat. Never faced an enemy that pushed forward without communication, without pause, without even responding to surrender signals. The humans, as they called themselves, were beyond unusual. They were unpredictable. And unpredictability, to the Varn, was terror incarnate. The scientific vessel Ilari Set drifted close, launching tethered probes that latched onto the hull of the Terran warship. Preliminary scans began. Immediately, anomalies surfaced. Energy readings remained inconsistent. Shield harmonics still echoed, even though the ship was supposedly dead. Subspace signatures flickered around it like a ghost of some deeper function that wouldn't fade. The first probe's readings made no sense. The outer armor, scanned at the molecular level, was comprised of metamaterial composites unknown in the Dominion archives. Not because they were too advanced, because they were stupid, inefficient, heavy, crude. But the density, it was off the charts. Kilometers of redundant plating, seemingly added not for design but for resilience. It wasn't elegant, it was excessive. A kind of brutal overengineering that spat in the face of all known naval doctrine. A second probe burrowed through the hull. Inside, sealed compartments packed with multiple layers of armor, atmospheric buffers, and emergency doors, dozens in sequence. Why? Why would a vessel prepare for so much internal failure? What were they expecting to survive? What kind of commander builds a ship that assumes it's going to bleed from the inside? A third scan detected something deeper. Some sections of the ship were blocked, encrypted in ways that defied digital logic. The Dominion's top data slicers tried brute force, heuristic mapping, and organic modeling. Nothing worked. The files didn't just refuse access. They looped into themselves, mimicking living patterns. The conclusion was hesitant at first but then unanimously agreed upon. This wasn't just encryption, it was psychological design. Whoever built this didn't want only to keep secrets. They wanted intruders to feel helpless trying. An unspoken chill began to creep over the Dominion analysts. The feeling that this ship was not simply constructed, it was grown. Not biologically, no, but intellectually, emotionally. It carried something in its design language that felt angry. The central processor node yielded another surprise. Instead of a clear control core, it was surrounded by secondary command clusters, each one independent, capable of assuming full operational control. Redundancy again. Overlap upon overlap. It was a ship built on paranoia. Every subsystem mirrored another. If one died, another took over. Power lines branched in fractal pathways. Communications hardwired through multiple failsafes. This ship had no critical failure point. Not even the Varn's Hive dreadnoughts were this secure. Not even their planetary control hubs were designed to function through complete crew loss. But here, even with 80% structural damage, the Terran ship still gave off low-power heartbeat signals. Passive, like a wounded animal still breathing in the dark. Waiting. A junior analyst made a critical observation, something the others missed. The ship's configuration wasn't built for traditional warfare. It was designed to be boarded, invaded, overrun. But instead of resisting that fate, it embraced it. Dozens of corridors funneled attackers toward kill zones. Vents laced with plasma dispersal systems. Artificial gravity configured to shift during breaches, forcing intruders to stumble. Not defense. Lures. The ship wanted to be touched. To be entered. So it could kill from the inside. The Dominion Science Commander tried to make sense of it. This vessel was not made to win a war. It was made to survive one. And to punish the idea of trying. Another anomaly, radiation patterns across the hull. Traces of neutron decay from close-range antimatter strikes, hits that should have vaporized any known structure. The dreadnought endured. Internal logs, partially recovered, showed that it had sustained such strikes and kept fighting for hours. One compartment had sealed itself, extinguished fires, and rebooted life support 13 times. The command structure of the ship, non-existent in any traditional sense. Logs referred not to a captain, but to a unified task lead, who rotated based on situational performance. Command was meritocratic, shifting instantly during battle. No central dependency on hierarchy. The system was self-correcting, faster than any Varn war protocol. No emotion. Just function. Yet everywhere in the logs, emotion bled through. Pride. Fury. Sacrifice. It was a machine filled with feeling. One final scan showed something none of them wanted to believe. The ship had deliberately drifted into the gas giant's orbit after battle. Not crashed, drifted. It was hiding, baiting. A wounded predator playing dead. Letting its enemies come close. Waiting to be found. The Dominion analysts didn't speak for several minutes. One of them finally muttered, "This isn't a warship. It's a message." Another replied, voice hollow, "Then what's the message?" Silence. Then from deep within the data stream, a fragment of human code decrypted on its own. A text string. A quote, primitive and ancient, embedded in the core file structure. You scan us to understand what we are. We built this ship to show you what we become when peace fails. And just below it, in raw Terran code, one last line. Next time don't look. Just run. The second level of analysis focused on structure, and the deeper they went, the less sense it made. From an engineering standpoint, the human vessel was a nightmare. The hull plating was composed of overlapping slabs several meters thick, laid out not in elegant, efficient lines, but in brutal, asymmetric layers. Some portions were literally welded over previous repairs, as though the crew anticipated damage so severe that formal reconstruction wouldn't be an option. There was no symmetry, no flow of design. Everything was bulk, redundancy, brutality. The analysts initially assumed it was the result of rushed construction. But then they saw the consistency. This chaos was intentional. Every room, corridor, and module was a compartmentalized cell. Nothing connected to anything else directly. Even internal walkways had embedded blast doors every few meters, each one independent. No fluid transit, no central corridors. The ship wasn't designed for comfort or speed, it was designed to be carved apart and keep moving. Redundant environmental systems ran in every room, as if every part of the ship expected to be isolated from the rest. And they were right. Data logs showed that in battle, large portions had been severed from the mainframe, yet each functioned independently for hours. It was as if the humans built the ship knowing it would be maimed, knowing it would bleed, and preparing each part to keep fighting while dying. The Dominion war theorists began comparing this philosophy to the Varn fleet doctrine. Varn ships were optimized for efficiency, speed, command hierarchy. But this was war viewed through the eyes of extinction. No graceful maneuvers. No backup from high command. Just the certainty of collapse and the intention to make that collapse into a weapon. Heat shielding on the lower decks was reinforced with triple hulls of dead mass, useless for anything but sheer absorption. In those same areas, internal compartments were rigged with volatile compounds and delayed ignition systems. Booby traps. Against boarders? Or themselves, in case they fell? Dominion Command reviewed logs showing instances of entire rooms venting atmosphere just to slow internal fires. Human crew members locked themselves inside bulkheads to override safeties. Some even modified ship walls with their bare hands under pressure, rerouting wires, replacing components with battlefield scrap. This wasn't just a vessel, it was a last stand engineered into a shape. Sensor arrays on the ship's dorsal ridge revealed further mysteries. They were interwoven with reflective plating and geometric scatter shields. But when their placement was mapped out fully, the resulting pattern wasn't just tactical, it was deliberate misdirection. Every weapon mount had a decoy twin, every heat vent a false exit. The ship was a puzzle built to be misunderstood. The kind of trick a desperate but brilliant mind would build when it couldn't outgun its enemy, but could still outthink them. In the ship's forward decks, Dominion analysts discovered labyrinthine structures, hallways twisting with illogical turns, doors placed at odd angles, stacked vertically as well as horizontally. Gravity manipulation plates existed on every axis, allowing humans to walk on walls, ceilings, or switch direction mid-battle. Confusing for enemies. Adaptive for crew. Everything built into the ship screamed of a mind trained not for command but for desperation. An engineering cross-section revealed a monstrous truth. The ship's superstructure was layered in a spiral, an inward-turning layout never seen in military design. It meant every breach drove attackers inward, toward hardened command points, rather than allowing them to progress in straight lines. Once breached, attackers were forced into corridors that curved, disoriented, and exposed them. The dreadnought didn't resist entry, it invited it, absorbed it, then killed from within. A trap masquerading as a tomb. The Varn's lead structural engineer made a chilling observation. The Terran ship wasn't just designed for combat. It was designed for prolonged suffering. To endure sustained torture and still remain dangerous. There were no comfort sectors, no relaxation chambers. Even the crew quarters were reinforced. Every part of the ship served a purpose tied directly to battle or recovery. No leisure. No luxury. Only readiness. Weapon placements provided another disturbing clue. Some of the turrets were fixed at strange angles, unable to aim directly forward. But when mapped with the ship's rotation patterns, the logic became clear. They didn't need precision, they relied on saturation. Human fire control algorithms aimed to blanket the sky with destruction, not finesse. Kill zones overlapped in chaotic layers, creating areas of absolute death where escape was mathematically impossible. The ship's kill radius extended far beyond its actual weapon range because of predictive trajectory software embedded in its targeting core. A recovered fragment of targeting code showed something chilling. The system tagged enemy escape pods the same way it tagged enemy warships. Equal priority. No mercy. No distinction between the wounded and the fighting. The Dominion found this appalling. Their own code was layered with ethical filters, even in war. But the Terran ship executed logic devoid of sentiment. Escape meant future resistance. Therefore, escape was denied. Power systems revealed further horrors. Backup reactors weren't just redundancies, they were designed to explode when compromised. In 3 recorded incidents, human crew manually overloaded compromised cores to act as impromptu warheads. The Varn couldn't decide what was worse, that the systems allowed this by design, or that the crew used it without hesitation. Sacrifice wasn't a last resort for them, it was part of the plan. Data nodes were self-replicating and mobile. Not fixed terminals, but autonomous clusters that could rebuild the ship's neural pathways in real time. The Dominion had never encountered anything like it. The ship wasn't just adaptable, it was self-evolving. Each battle changed it. Each loss made it smarter. Its scars were lessons, and it wore them like armor. From bow to stern, the vessel carried no insignia, no decoration. Not even identification codes. Just a dark, blank surface designed to absorb light and defy scans. An analyst noted that even the nameplate had been removed. When asked why, one Dominion philosopher theorized, because it's not a symbol. It's a threat. Everything suggested that the ship wasn't meant to inspire its enemies. It was meant to horrify them. And it was working. The more they studied it, the more the Varn crew realized the terrifying truth. The ship didn't reflect human technology, it reflected human thinking. Human survival. Human fury. And worst of all, human intent. The kind of intent that didn't end with victory. It ended with annihilation. The final note of the structural report read, "If this is their vessel at rest, I cannot imagine what one looks like when it's hunting." The deeper they scanned, the stranger it became. The Dominion had expected cold binary logic at the heart of the Terran dreadnought, predictable systems, artificial intelligence nodes, and command hierarchies rooted in mechanical control. What they found instead broke every assumption. There was no central AI. No unifying digital overseer. Instead, the core of the vessel was organic. Not biologically alive, but built to mimic human neurofunction at a fundamental level. The ship didn't think like a machine. It reacted like a brain, specifically, a traumatized one. A network of what the Dominion called neurocores was mapped across the interior, clusters of synthetic protein matrices interfacing directly with carbon nanocircuits. These weren't passive processors. They adapted, grew, and even rewrote themselves during combat. Battle logs showed the system rerouting power away from damaged sectors within milliseconds, prioritizing sensory data that aligned with human crew perception. It wasn't optimizing for efficiency. It was optimizing for intuition. The ship was designed not to be commanded, but to understand its crew, moment to moment. One of the cores, recovered intact, bore tissue residues. DNA traces confirmed it. Partial human neural matter had been integrated into the machine. The Dominion's top bioengineers were stunned. Not cloning. Not artificial brains. These were fragments of real people, merged into the ship's interface systems. Some willingly, others posthumously. Memory patterns suggested that these minds retained fragments of consciousness even after integration. In effect, parts of the crew became the ship. The implications sent waves through Dominion Command. This was not cybernetics. It was convergence. A philosophy where the line between human and machine didn't exist. The dreadnought wasn't piloted by humans. It was human, in a way no Dominion engineer could comprehend. The systems weren't just reactive, they were emotional. Shield harmonics spiked in correlation to stress patterns among the crew. Engine performance surged during moments of panic. Weapon targeting became more aggressive when internal vitals detected wounded operators. The ship didn't follow orders. It empathized with pain. Further scans of command consoles revealed a terrifying simplicity. Neural ports, designed for direct brainstem connection, were everywhere: seatbacks, walls, even in combat armor racks. The Dominion assumed they were for command rank only. But records showed enlisted personnel using them freely. Command wasn't vertical. It was distributed. In emergencies, janitors could pilot systems. Mechanics could redirect fire control. The ship's AI recognized intent over authority. A structure built not on loyalty, but on will. Recordings recovered from neurocore memory threads confirmed it. During a critical moment of battle, when upper command was dead and systems were failing, a 19-year-old technician hijacked into the ship's propulsion control and initiated a burn maneuver that saved thousands. She had no training. The system adapted to her mental rhythm within seconds, filtering out stress indicators, focusing only on intent. Dominion war officers reviewed the footage and unanimously agreed, no Varn ship would have allowed such a breach of protocol. And no Varn ship would have survived that battle. The human-brain-machine symbiosis extended even to the weapon systems. Gunners didn't operate consoles. They became the guns. Neural uplinks allowed them to feel every recoil, track heat like hunger, sense trajectory like muscle memory. Pain overlays were encoded into failure feedback. When a weapon jammed, the operator felt a phantom spasm. Not punishment, alignment. The ship's systems weren't tools. They were extensions of thought, driven by emotional resonance. Dominion analysts hesitated to discuss what came next. Buried deep within the dreadnought's secondary data buffers was a program, heavily encrypted, reactive, and alive. It didn't respond to standard access attempts. Instead, it waited. When one of the Varn's organic logic circuits brushed against its outer layer, it triggered a response. Not violent. Not defensive. Curious. It mimicked the probe's signature, adapted to its processing pattern, and began mirroring its logic. The Varn were horrified. They shut it down instantly. But the point had been made. The Terran program didn't just resist intrusion. It learned from it. Copied it. And when translated, its first output was a question: are you alone? This wasn't code. It was personality. Embedded in metal, pulsing in data. A ship that missed its crew. That sought contact. The Dominion researchers argued whether it was a ghost in the system or something more. But one thing was certain: the program recognized the intrusion as something new. It wanted to understand. And it had been waiting. Biofeedback recordings taken during the final moments of the ship's battle confirmed another pattern. Crew members linked into the system did not show standard fight or flight reactions. Instead, most entered a state of hyperfocus, limbic suppression, cortical acceleration, and synchronized heartbeat patterns. The ship matched them. Vital signs between the vessel and its crew began to align. The dreadnought was amplifying them, synchronizing human cognition across multiple nodes like a shared consciousness. The Dominion had never seen anything like it. Their own battle systems used swarm logic, distributed across fleets. This was different. This was swarm logic within one hull, binding flesh and steel into a single will. A will not controlled, but voluntary merged, unified by a singular purpose: survival through destruction. Internal logs detailed re-entry cycles where crew would jack into the system for mental recovery, rewriting traumatic events, recalibrating memories, even suppressing fear. The ship provided psychological shielding. Not for performance. For human endurance. It helped them keep fighting, even when they should have broken. A machine that healed the soul enough to keep killing. One Dominion socio-psychologist, after reviewing the logs, filed a single comment in the report: "This ship doesn't want to win. It wants its enemies to break trying." In one final scan, deep within a corrupted memory thread, they found something that didn't belong. A child's voice. Laughing. A lullaby in a dead language. When enhanced, the data pattern resembled early-stage memory imprinting. The ship remembered its crew. Not just orders or tasks, but people. Names. Faces. Loss. The Terran dreadnought was more than a weapon. It was a haunted cathedral built from flesh and fire, carrying the echoes of those who died to keep it alive. And as the Dominion team prepared to shut down their scans, they found one last message, hidden behind a Neurogate keyed to emotional resonance. Translated simply, it read, "We are still here. And we remember who hurt us." They isolated the black box core buried deep in the wreckage. Hardened beyond comprehension, it had survived direct hull breaches, reactor spikes, and total depressurization. Extracting its contents took the Dominion's best cyberneticists 14 continuous hours, and when the first audio files began to play, silence fell across the lab. The recordings weren't system logs or ship-to-ship comms. They were voices. Human voices, raw, emotional, and alive in a way that no Dominion archive had ever captured. The first recovered segment was chaotic. Multiple speakers overlapping, alarms in the background, damage reports streaming in bursts. A male voice barked rapid instructions, then another took over mid-sentence, unfazed. The switch was seamless. No rank dispute. No hesitation. Whoever had the clearest mind led. No time wasted. Every line was heavy with urgency, not panic. Beneath the fear was something worse, clarity. These weren't soldiers fighting for survival. They were professionals trained to expect it. Another segment unfolded as the ship took critical damage. A breach opened across multiple decks, but the voices kept coming. A crew member, wheezing through pain, reported hull temperature spikes while overriding coolant limitations. His final words were, "Let her burn, the shot lands first." That section of the ship later recorded a full energy surge that ruptured 3 capacitors, on purpose, sacrificing propulsion for one last weapon discharge. The crew didn't scream. They calculated. The Dominion team analyzed over 300 such recordings. They were not meant for post-battle review. These were internal logs, personal memos, private recordings, many made in the final seconds before death. Some were confessions, some were messages to family, some were just noise, grunts, laughter, muttered curses. But the pattern was chilling. These humans weren't losing their minds in crisis. They leaned into it. They made jokes as the hull cracked. They sang through impacts. One recording featured a crew member laughing as his section decompressed, mocking the enemy that did it. There was something horrifying about a species that met death with humor. The Dominion's emotional analysis systems struggled to categorize the data. Their neural networks, calibrated to track panic, breakdown, aggression, and despair, returned inconsistent readings. Human emotional signatures didn't behave predictably. One crew member's vitals showed pure terror, yet their voice issued calm, flawless commands. Another's heartbeat flatlined, yet her neural link to the ship remained live for 37 more seconds, long enough to reroute power away from a failing containment chamber. Emotion and function operated independently. Where most species shut down, humans compartmentalized. The internal memory recordings were just as disturbing. Visual feeds taken from crew implants showed scenes of pure destruction, deck fires, ruptured machinery, decomposing bodies floating through zero-G corridors. But even in the worst of it, the focus of each crew member remained on task. One engineer crawled through a collapsed shaft, both legs shattered, dragging himself by hand while muttering calculations. His last log entry was a voice message to his brother: "If you find this, tell Mom I remembered the breaker matrix. I got it right this time." He died with the override in his hand. What unsettled the analysts most was the absence of hierarchy in the logs. Authority shifted fluidly, like instinct. A medical officer gave engine orders. A janitor directed fire suppression systems. The ship recognized action, not title. And so did the crew. Everyone was responsible. No one waited. In a Dominion ship, a chain of command broke and nothing moved. Here, every link was the command. The dreadnought wasn't led. It was inhabited. Some logs weren't functional at all. One showed a crew member whispering a story to a corpse, eyes bloodshot, surrounded by fire suppression foam. Another recited poetry during atmospheric collapse. Not for morale. For identity. A desperate human act of saying, I am still me, while the world died around them. These moments weren't weakness. They were weapons against fear. The Dominion sociolinguists struggled to explain it. Words as shields. Memories as anchors. These people weren't invincible. But they refused to become victims. The more the Dominion listened, the more they realized the terrifying consistency in the recordings. Not just coordination, but intent. Every death was bought. Every moment calculated. Not one crew member died without extracting cost. Even unconscious, biosuits kept neural ports open long enough for the ship to use remaining brain activity. The dreadnought wasn't just surviving. It was harvesting willpower, converting it into functional decisions up to the very last breath of the last human aboard. A classified file, locked behind emotional recognition gates, finally unlocked after enough patterns were mapped. It was a command message from the ship's final surviving officer, transmitted just minutes before all systems went dark. In a hoarse voice, she addressed future human forces, assuming they'd recover the ship. But the message was also aimed at those who might intercept the signal. Her tone was steady measured, even as internal temperatures passed fatal levels. She said, if you're listening to this and you're not human, understand what you've found. We built this ship with our grief. We armed it with our failures. We did not come here to win. We came to prove we could not be erased quietly. Then came a silence. A long, deliberate pause. The kind that made even the Dominion engineers lean forward. Her final words, in unbroken English, were, we were afraid too. But we learned something. You don't need hope to keep fighting. Just anger. And enough time. She died seconds later. The core shut down. The logs ended. The Dominion's top analysts compiled a full psychological profile of the Terran crew. The conclusion, though clinical, read like a death sentence. Subject species exhibits extreme cognitive adaptability under terminal stress. Displays capacity for humor, coordination, and moral resolution at statistically impossible thresholds. Emotional volatility does not impair, but enhances operational capability. Tactical response. Avoid direct engagement during peak psychological convergence. Strategic assessment. Threat level extreme. And still, it wasn't enough. Because none of the audio, none of the footage, none of the logs explained one last anomaly. A subroutine embedded in every voice recording. Not inserted by command, not part of the ship's protocol. Just a phrase, whispered or spoken or muttered again and again by multiple crew, at different times, in different tones. We're not done. Over and over. We're not done. The ship was a grave. The crew were gone. But the message remained. The analysis shifted to the weapon systems, and with it came the most unsettling discoveries yet. The Terran dreadnought's offensive loadout was not just advanced, it was irrational. From the Varn perspective, its arsenal lacked strategic balance. There were no warning systems, no escalating deterrents, no weapons designed to disable or subdue. Every mount, every launcher, every turret served a single purpose: destruction beyond recovery. There was no middle ground. The humans had built their ship like a judgment, total, final, and indiscriminate. At the center of it all was the primary weapon system, a zero-point singularity driver. A device that should not have existed outside theoretical physics. Dominion science had dismissed the concept as suicidal. Containing a singularity long enough to weaponize it required material stability far beyond any known alloy. Yet here it was, embedded into the hull of a ship that had already fought and won. The energy readings confirmed it had been fired multiple times. The residue across the barrel showed gravitational warping consistent with micro-black hole generation. This was not theory. It was field-tested death. The weapon was positioned along the keel, not for maximum field of fire, but for straight-line deployment, an unmistakable signal of intent. It wasn't a threat to be maneuvered or a tool of pressure. It was the equivalent of stabbing space itself. And the logs showed it had been used at ranges considered suicidal. In 2 engagements, the Dreadnought had fired the Singularity Driver within effective collision distance, enduring the space-time distortions it unleashed. The Dominion commanders, reviewing the data, had no words. The humans had risked implosion, collapse, and structural annihilation just to guarantee a kill. The crew knew it. The logs were clear. Before one such shot, the weapons officer calmly recorded, "This one's going to hit too close. Everyone buckle. If we go down, they go with us." It was not a bluff. It was protocol. Human warfare doctrine didn't separate victory from sacrifice. The two were intertwined. If the enemy lived, the humans had failed. That singularity gun wasn't a deterrent. It was a declaration. If they pulled the trigger, survival was secondary. Secondary weapon systems offered no comfort. Missile bays carried warheads rigged with multiple detonation stages, designed to burrow into enemy hulls before releasing directional plasma bursts. Railguns fired slugs so dense their own recoil cracked the internal mounting rails. The engineers had pre-programmed the damage into maintenance cycles. One of the logs read, "Mounts going to snap after 3 rounds. Fire 6 anyway." Self-destruction was not just accepted, it was factored in. The close-range weapons were even more horrifying. The ship carried rotating fragmentation blasters that deployed clouds of magnetic shrapnel. Not optimized for shielding penetration or hull breaches, but for inflicting maximum internal personnel casualties. The patterns showed scatter clusters aimed at airlocks, maintenance shafts, and boarding hatches. It wasn't just defensive. It was predatory. Like the ship assumed it would be invaded and planned not only to repel boarders, but to slaughter them. Worse were the automated fallback weapons, systems that activated without human input when certain thresholds were met. One was found hardwired to the life support monitors. If internal casualties reached 80%, a buried compartment would open to release a fusion core overload device. A dead man's switch built into the heart of the ship. Dominion tacticians called it insanity. But Dominion soldiers had never fought wars of extinction. Humans had. They built their weapons not with survival in mind, but memory. Revenge baked into metal. The weapon targeting logs showed no signs of restraint. The AI had tagged escape pods, fleeing vessels, and unarmed transports as high-priority threats if they were determined to be relaying coordinates. In 3 separate battles, the Dreadnought fired upon disabled cruisers already adrift in space. A war crime by Dominion standards. A necessity by Terran logic. If the enemy could talk, they could warn. If they could warn, more would come. The Dreadnought's tactics weren't cruel, they were final. The targeting algorithm itself was unlike any Dominion had seen. It didn't prioritize based on proximity or threat. It scanned for emotional distress. Heat patterns. Pulse fluctuations. Once human-linked, the ship focused fire where panic was highest, where the enemy broke formation. It didn't just attack. It hunted collapse. A system designed to amplify psychological pressure until the opposing force fractured under its own terror. Even the reload systems were unorthodox. Munitions were stored across randomized compartments to prevent targeting of ammo banks. Auto-loading systems were built with crude, easily replaceable machinery, because in human doctrine, battlefield repair was a given. One log detailed a weapons tech replacing a fusion regulator with a cooking unit. It worked. It held for 2 salvos. The humans didn't wait for clean solutions. They bled the gun until it cooled or broke, and then they broke the next thing in line. The Varn tried to understand the design logic behind it all. What did it say about a species that built weapons knowing they'd be operated by the dying? That constructed launchers around improvisation, chaos, and endurance instead of precision? The answer was buried in one recovered training simulation. Any system you can fire once is a system that can win. Any system you can fire while dying is a system that already has. One final review of the Singularity Driver revealed something the engineers had missed. Inside its housing was a reinforced recording module. Not for diagnostics. For playback. The file was corrupted, damaged, but parts were audible. A voice. Human. Cold, resolute. speaking not to crew, not to allies, but directly to those who would face the weapon's wrath. If you see this cannon charging, it's already too late. We didn't build this to intimidate you. We built it because you made us choose between peace and silence. We chose the noise. You came here to conquer. We came here to end the conversation. No boast. No malice. Just fact. The Dominion had long believed that wars were about dominance. Humans saw it differently. For them, war was memory. Every weapon a reply. Every ship a grave marker carved into orbit. And every shot fired by that dreadnought screamed one undeniable truth: humanity did not fight to live. They fought to make sure their enemies didn't. The focus shifted from machinery to the species behind it. The Dominion needed to understand what kind of civilization engineered such violence so casually, so thoroughly. They had gathered enough fragments from the ship's databanks to piece together parts of human history, cultural logs, and internal philosophies. What they found wasn't innovation. It was trauma. Layered, generational, deeply embedded into their doctrine. Humanity didn't design war machines from ambition, they built them out of memory. Every system, every choice, every terrifying decision stemmed from one truth: they had never known peace that lasted. The earliest Earth transmissions were grim. Civil wars, planetary conflicts, global collapses, near-extinction level catastrophes, all self-inflicted. Their history was stained with fire. By Dominion standards, their civilization should have died a dozen times over. But each time, they rebuilt. Each collapse forged a harder, more prepared generation. Their philosophers didn't speak of harmony, they spoke of survival, of being tempered like steel, of learning through pain. One audio clip looped in the database repeated the same phrase over and over: hard times make strong people. Strong people make peace. Peace makes soft people. And soft people break. It wasn't a lesson. It was a cycle. And they embraced it. Their military doctrine reflected this perfectly. Unlike most species, they didn't treat war as a last resort. It was always an option. Not preferred, but available. Ready. Practiced. While the Dominion pursued elegance in combat, humanity trained for collapse. Their training programs simulated full system failure as the norm. Their soldiers were taught to lead without officers, to build without engineers, to win without hope. One document described a combat scenario where success was measured not in victory, but in the percentage of enemy resources permanently denied. They planned to lose. And to make that loss cost more than winning ever could. The Dominion's war doctrine was centralized, coordinated, and strategic. Humanity's was decentralized, reactive, and relentless. They didn't rely on superiority. They relied on refusal, on not quitting, on dragging the enemy into exhaustion. Every human tactic was built around denying the adversary peace. Not just on the battlefield, but afterward. Their presence meant tension. Their victory meant legacy. And their loss meant fury. Even in their literature, this philosophy was clear. Story after story glorified sacrifice, rebellion, outnumbered survival. Characters who burned themselves alive just to hold the line for one more second. One popular text found on the ship simply stated, "If you're out of weapons, use your hands. If you're out of strength, use your teeth. If you're out of breath, use your hate." Dominion translators assumed it was a metaphor. It wasn't. This mindset bled into their command structures. No dependency on centralized leadership. No critical command link that, if severed, caused paralysis. Orders were distributed but not essential. Autonomy was expected. Initiative was rewarded. In Dominion fleets, disobedience led to punishment. In human fleets, obedience without adaptation led to death. One officer's journal entry was blunt: if you need orders to act in battle, you're already in someone's way. Culturally, humans didn't value dominance, they valued vengeance. Their wars were rarely started by them, but once engaged, they never allowed the instigators to forget. Dominion analysts uncovered campaigns that lasted decades, long after the enemy had surrendered, just to ensure deterrence. Deterrence, for humanity, wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about teaching regret. And they never taught gently. One of the most unsettling discoveries was humanity's emotional range in combat. Most species either suppressed emotion or were crippled by it. Humans used it. weaponized it. Their grief became motivation. Their fear became calculation. Their anger became focus. Medical logs showed combat performance increased under psychological strain. Adrenaline, cortisol, serotonin, all rising under duress, sharpening reflexes, accelerating thought. Dominion biology found this backward. For humans, it was foundational. They were at their most dangerous when losing. Their rites of remembrance revealed even more. Every battle, every loss, every name carved into hulls or memorial files, none were deleted. None were forgotten. Their ships carried the dead like sails carried wind. One recovered file was a dedication video, showing images of lost crew layered over soft voices saying names aloud. The closing line chilled every analyst. We didn't die for flags. We died so no one forgets why we were willing. This belief in memory as a weapon was reinforced in their technology. Neural links between ship and crew weren't just functional, they were emotional conduits. The dreadnought learned from the pain of its crew, stored it, adapted to it. Battle reports became mourning logs. Tactical assessments cross-referenced with crew eulogies. The ship's design literally evolved through grief. A hidden document found embedded in a fragment of old Earth code detailed something the Dominion could barely understand, a project called the Warkeeper Protocol. It wasn't a weapons system. It was a cultural preservation matrix, every crew member's final thoughts, combat records, personal reflections, and memories encoded into the vessel's core. Not for data retrieval. For personality retention. Not one crew was ever entirely gone. Every new dreadnought carried a part of the ones before it. Humanity didn't just remember its warriors. It absorbed them. Dominion Command began to grasp the scale of the problem. This was not a race that fought for resources, territory, or expansion. This was a species that fought because it was conditioned to. Their entire civilization was trauma-hardened, fear-adapted, survival-obsessed. They didn't seek to conquer, they sought to endure. Every war they engaged in became part of their cultural DNA. They did not forget. And they never forgave. The Dreadnought systems backed this fully. Its last strategic simulation logs, moments before its final engagement, showed no projections of victory. Every model showed loss. Yet the systems executed anyway, flawlessly. Not to survive, but to leave a scar. To ensure the enemy never wanted to return. The Dominion, despite all its conquests, had never faced a species willing to weaponize inevitability. The humans didn't resist death. They shaped it. A final log, encoded beneath the maintenance diagnostics, delivered one last insight. It wasn't a threat, or a warning, or a boast. Just a sentence. Calm. Cold. Clinical. Buried like a seed. If we fall, it means we've already decided you're not allowed to stand after. The Dominion launched a secondary probe mission to the remains of the Dreadnought, this time focused on the outer engagement logs and battlefield telemetry, hoping to reconstruct the ship's final conflict. They expected confusion, garbled data, and corrupted timestamps. What they received instead was a perfect timeline, cold and methodical. The Terran vessel had recorded every second, every heat flare, every vector shift, every enemy maneuver, cataloged in merciless detail. It didn't just record its own battle. It recorded the deaths of its enemies with surgical precision. The battle had started with a surprise ambush by Dominion forces. 3 cruisers and 2 heavy destroyers opened fire at once. The Dreadnought didn't respond immediately. Not out of hesitation, but out of calculation. The telemetry showed it absorbing the first volley without reaction, letting armor peel, systems overload, even a portion of the dorsal hull rupture, all to bait the attackers into committing fully. Once they did, the Dreadnought snapped into motion. Its first counterstrike wasn't a barrage. It was a scan. A pulse wave designed to paint every ship's weak points in real time, targeting not by structure, but by behavior. The logs marked each enemy vessel with emotional data, hesitation, aggression, fear. Humans had mapped Dominion flight patterns to emotional states. Their ship fought as if it was reading mood, not math. It engaged the least nervous vessel first, knowing that the ones with doubt would falter faster when left alone. The Dreadnought's first kill was a destroyer that had shown no signs of fear. Within seconds, that confidence turned into a wreck of spinning debris. The rest of the Dominion ships panicked. The battle footage showed the formation break, But more telling was the human ship's response. It didn't pursue the broken line. It herded them. Positioned itself where their evasion paths overlapped. Not moving to intercept, but to interrupt. It didn't chase. It cornered. Every motion was deliberate, cruel, economic. What disturbed Dominion analysts most was the efficiency of the ship's response time. It didn't overcommit. It never repeated a tactic. In one instance, it deployed a minefield of plasma orbs in a spread pattern that corralled the enemy into a kill zone, then retracted half the orbs to feign an opening. When the enemy fled through the supposed gap, a side cannon cluster obliterated the mid-turn. The maneuver had no formal designation. It wasn't protocol. It was improvisation. Human warfare in motion wasn't a doctrine, it was a living organism. Ship-to-ship communication was intercepted midway through the battle. The Dominion captains had tried broadcasting surrender and request for parley. The dreadnought didn't answer. Not once. Not out of cruelty. The logs showed it received the signals. It simply didn't care. Its targeting logs treated all ships equally, broadcasting or not, damaged or not, pleading or not. Humans didn't enter that battle expecting diplomacy. They came knowing they were already dead. And they intended to take everything with them. One portion of the logs detailed a maneuver so precise it became legend among Dominion tacticians. The dreadnought, while under fire from multiple angles, turned off its primary drive and rotated using only auxiliary thrusters, spinning on 3 axes to aim all major weapons in different directions simultaneously. It scored 5 hits in under a second. All lethal. The maneuver required calculations that should have taken several seconds of processing. The human crew did it instinctively, aided by the ship's neural interface. No other known species could have pulled it off. The analysts labeled it the broken starfall. The dreadnought wasn't invulnerable. Its outer hull had taken catastrophic damage by the time the last Dominion cruiser closed in. But that too had been expected. The logs showed pre-programmed fallback points for every breach. Not static fallback plans. Dynamic scripts built around real-time damage conditions. It didn't retreat. It pivoted. Every internal failure triggered an offensive cascade. Loss of a port-side cannon redirected cooling systems to feed reactor thrust, pushing the ship forward into ramming range. A hull fracture exposed an internal plasma vent. It rotated to face the vent toward an incoming missile. It didn't dodge. It weaponized its own wound. The final minutes of the battle were a masterclass in desperation turned into design. With its engines failing, the ship rerouted power to external hull plates, overcharging them to emit a high radiation burst that blinded targeting systems. Not as an escape, there was nowhere left to go, but to allow one last volley. The Singularity driver fired at minimal charge, destabilized and half-corrupted, tearing the last enemy battleship into a collapsing spiral of debris. Then the dreadnought coasted powerless, into the gravity well of a gas giant. It didn't crash. The logs were clear. Trajectory was calculated. Descent was deliberate. Power systems were rerouted to create an anti-scan cloak. The vessel chose to disappear. To be buried where it might never be found, dragging its enemies with it. The final log entry was encrypted, triggered only when its own systems detected a proximity scan from an alien source. The message was simple. No translation needed. Just one phrase, recorded in every Earth language, layered with synthetic harmonics. You wanted to know what we are. The Dominion had expected a trap. A self-destruct. A final defensive lash-out. But what they got instead was understanding, given only when it could no longer be used against the humans. The dreadnought fought with purpose, died with meaning, and left behind not a warning, but a design. An echo. Every decision it made was embedded in its logs. Every response was intentional. The entire battle, in hindsight, was less about victory and more about demonstration. Dominion warplanners, upon reviewing the full simulation, came to a chilling consensus. This was not the most advanced Terran ship. It was not their first response, nor their final form. It was simply one of many. A single weapon in an arsenal designed not for conquest, but for survival with prejudice. And it had gone to its death not screaming, but teaching. Showing the enemy exactly what it meant to provoke a civilization that had forgotten how to surrender. The final summary in the battle report stated it plainly: this ship fought to be remembered. And it succeeded. In the weeks following the full analysis of the Dreadnought's final battle, Dominion intelligence initiated a deep-dive comparison project, cross-referencing the Terran vessel structure, tactics, and logs with every known military vessel humanity had deployed over the last 5 cycles. The results shattered their confidence. The ship wasn't a relic, nor was it a prototype. It represented a doctrine, one that had quietly matured across dozens of skirmishes and minor wars the Dominion had dismissed as insignificant. The Dreadnought was not unique. It was the blueprint of a new human standard. Recovered transmission intercepts revealed coordinated fleet movements across fringe systems, each involving human vessels bearing similar structural asymmetry, redundant layouts, and psychological warfare tactics. The pattern was clear. These weren't isolated anomalies. Humanity had stopped designing for peace entirely. Their ships were shaped not around efficiency or aesthetics, but around the expectation of loss. They built vessels that expected to bleed. And they bled on purpose. A Dominion report, originally marked classified, broke the numbers down with clinical horror. Terran ships showed a consistent combat-to-death ratio 3 times higher than any other race. Their survivability was below average. Their success rate was disproportionate. They did not rely on shielding technology superior to their enemies. They did not possess more powerful weapons. What they possessed was unacceptable attrition tolerance. When a human ship engaged, it fought like it had already written its obituary. Its mission wasn't to return, it was to erase whatever killed it. Internal logs found on a smaller escort vessel accompanying the Dreadnought included training regimens, psychological conditioning modules, and crew rotation policies. The themes repeated across every document: no rescue plans, no dependency training, no morale fluff. Emotional self-management, trauma integration, pain compartmentalization, taught like weapon maintenance. The logs referred to it plainly: functional despair. Human officers didn't need their crews to be fearless. They needed them to endure fear without stopping. The only metric was forward momentum. What Dominion sociologists found most difficult to rationalize was how ordinary it had become. These doctrines weren't viewed by humans as extreme. The logs showed no dissent, no mass rebellion, no breakdown from the burden. They treated it as a matter of fact. As though the galaxy had taught them, over time, that mercy was a risk, compassion a vulnerability, and idealism a luxury they could no longer afford. One officer in an audio debriefing said, "We used to fight because we believed in things. Now we fight so we can afford to believe in something again someday." Further review of galactic incident reports exposed another disturbing trend. In engagements where human vessels were outmatched and cornered, they still inflicted catastrophic damage, often after they were technically destroyed. Multiple accounts confirmed the use of systems designed for post-mortem activation. Human ships detonating reactors only after their last crew member expired. Autonomic weapon systems remaining dormant until salvagers arrived, then activating to ensure the wreck remained a grave, not a lesson. One Dominion salvage team lost 2 full recovery ships in such an incident. The automated distress beacon had been left running for days. Not as a cry for help. As bait. Newer human vessels were beginning to appear at the edges of known systems. Each one bore the same silence: no broadcast, no identifiers, no standard communication channels. They didn't seek dialogue. They didn't announce entry. They simply arrived, observed, and if provoked, responded with terminal force. One scout ship transmitted a hail in perfect Dominion dialect, simply stating, "Engage at your own risk. This will not be a war. It will be an ending." The signal was traced back to a mobile command carrier carrying no registered crew manifest. The Dominion, for the first time in decades, halted fleet advancement into a contested region without engagement. Strategists began shifting their entire perception of humanity's military posture. It wasn't expansionist. It was defensive in the most aggressive form possible. Their fleet patterns formed no empire, claimed no territory, and left no permanent installations. They moved like sharks, solitary, relentless, and always circling. Dominion data projections estimated that for every battle fought publicly, 3 more were fought in silence, unrecorded, unacknowledged, erased with terrifying precision. One intercepted Terran broadcast, buried in background noise on a commercial frequency, gave insight into their new tactical doctrine. A man's voice, calm and slow, speaking to no one in particular: "We've learned that diplomacy only works with the willing." For everyone else, we've stopped wasting time. If you force us to draw the blade, we're going to bury it so deep that the next 3 generations will feel it every time they close their eyes. Dominion analysts debated whether it was propaganda. But then the losses kept coming. Quiet ships. Sudden violence. No survivors. What horrified the Dominion more than tactics was purpose. The humans weren't seeking dominance. They didn't impose ideology. They didn't enslave, occupy, or exploit. Their victories had no flag ceremonies. No broadcasts of triumph. In one case, after destroying a Varn colonial fleet, the humans left behind medical supplies and automated warnings to evacuate the atmosphere due to residual radiation. They hadn't come to rule. They'd come to stop something, and then vanish before they could be thanked. Further logs retrieved from the dreadnought confirmed this was intentional. The crew had operated under a non-expansionist directive. Their orders were clear: leave nothing behind they can use. Leave no stories where they can hide. Leave no wounds without a scar. Their goal wasn't conquest. It was deterrence. Their presence was meant to be remembered not with hate, but with hesitation. One last file, found encrypted in an unused sensor buffer, broke the pattern. It wasn't a log, warning, or tactical replay. It was a recording, short, personal, and spoken in a hushed, private tone. A human voice, younger than the others, female, and quiet. "We used to be explorers," she said. "We thought the stars would bring us peace. We thought meeting others would make us better. But we were wrong. Every time we extended a hand, someone bit it off. So now we don't reach. We watch. We wait. And when someone tries to burn our home, we remind them what fire really feels like." The file ended. The Dominion Command Council reviewed it in silence. No rebuttal. No denial. The numbers supported every word. The dreadnought had been a single story in a growing pattern, one chapter in a message that the humans were no longer sending through diplomacy, but through consequences. They didn't care about perception. They only cared that no one forgot what happened the last time someone thought they were soft. The report closed with a single sentence, unclassified and sent to all fleets. Humanity is no longer fighting for survival. They're fighting to make sure they never have to again. Dominion Command ordered a full psychological warfare assessment, hoping to model the threat of further human engagements. The results were worse than anticipated. Dominion military simulations relied heavily on prediction algorithms built from enemy patterns, morale thresholds, surrender points, risk-reward behaviors. With humans, those models failed catastrophically. There was no consistent threshold for collapse. Some human units fought past the point of logic, others surrendered in tactical deception only to retaliate with embedded detonation charges. No formula worked. Human psychology, especially in combat, refused to follow any clean curve. The report classified the phenomenon under a new term, indeterminate will factor. It described the human capacity to continue applying pressure, physically or psychologically, well beyond sustainability. Not as anomaly, but as baseline. In one historical engagement, a human infantry division under orbital bombardment continued pushing a front line without air support or reinforcements for 3 days. When finally overrun, Dominion forces found their command center had been destroyed on the first night. They had been acting with no leadership, no oversight, just momentum. Even outside of warfare, the Dominion had underestimated the cultural persistence of Terran memory. Propaganda was ineffective against them. Demoralization campaigns returned zero result. In one experiment, a captured Terran broadcast was altered to show the destruction of one of their colonies. It was then rebroadcast across known human sectors. The response was instant mobilization, not fear or submission, but violent retaliation. Dominion intelligence had failed to grasp the deep-rooted emotional architecture of human collective behavior. Pain didn't erode them. It cemented them. Their response to threat was also decentralized. No central government issued declarations. No single planetary authority led their war efforts. They operated through autonomous cells, local militias, ship-bound microgovernments, and nomadic military units. But they all acted with disturbing coordination. Not because of command, but because of shared history. Humans didn't need hierarchy to unify. They needed only the idea of a common enemy. The mere perception of a threat was enough to bind them. An analysis of recovered Terran cultural records painted the full picture. Their mythologies centered on defiance. Their heroes were often flawed, outnumbered, abandoned, but they prevailed through stubbornness, sacrifice, or sheer refusal to die. Dominion sociologists struggled to quantify it. One analyst wrote, "They are a species that romanticizes collapse. They do not see tragedy as failure. They see it as duty fulfilled." Worse still, the dreadnought systems had not just been built to endure, it had been built to witness. Embedded across its subsystems were story preservation protocols, encrypted memories of every engagement, designed not only for tactical review, but to ensure the next vessel learned from the last. Human ships were not designed individually. They were genealogical. Each one carried the memory, pain, and lessons of those that came before. A lineage of violence, failure, and correction. With each destroyed, the next emerged smarter, harder, and crueler. The Dominion attempted to project long-term outcomes. The findings were grim. Every human defeat guaranteed a more lethal successor. Each failed engagement ensured the enemy would return, equipped with data, adapted with new aggression. And the humans didn't need to win every fight. They needed only to remember each loss and apply it. That made them impossible to suppress long-term. Killing them was not removal, it was reinforcement. The psychological models concluded that humans used grief as propulsion. One Dominion field commander recounted surviving a skirmish against human forces, only to have his ship tracked across 2 systems and dismantled by a different group months later. There had been no strategic value. The mission was not retaliation. It was completion. An emotional closure encoded into tactics. Dominion war doctrine had no counter to this. Additional concern grew around the way humans broadcast their silence. Entire sectors had gone dark after minor engagements. No follow-up. No movement. Just quiet. Dominion scouts sent to investigate found destroyed relay satellites, scorched planetary surfaces, and carefully arranged debris fields spelling warnings in visual code. Humans didn't need to shout. They understood the value of absence as a message. Entire fleet routes were now being rerouted not because of human control, but because of human intent. Their message was simple: proceed, and you will be reminded why you shouldn't have. Further intelligence pointed to a growing trend in Terran military behavior, the deliberate surrender of winnable territory in exchange for long-term psychological warfare. On one frontier moon, a human garrison allowed itself to be overrun, only for the moon's crust to be laced with antimatter triggers that detonated weeks later when Dominion supply ships landed. It wasn't defense. It was scripted punishment. Dominion High Command had no explanation for the long delay attack. The humans had no way of knowing the timetable. And yet, it had been perfectly executed. That kind of planning required commitment beyond the battlefield. It required a cultural obsession with making sure you never forget what you did to us. A pattern emerged across Dominion-controlled border regions: civilians relocated without orders, supply convoys diverted with no warning, skirmish reports growing fewer, but deadlier. The humans weren't fighting for territory. They were poisoning the idea of conflict. Each encounter with them carried cost. Not just material, but existential. Soldiers reported sleep disruption, paranoia, even nightmares after surviving Terran battles. Psychological fallout increased tenfold after crews viewed recovered human logs, especially recordings of the dreadnought's final hours. Dominion morale hadn't just been damaged. It had been shaken. As a final test, Dominion Command leaked falsified plans of a renewed offensive into known human sectors. The bait was meant to draw out overconfident forces. No movement occurred. No ships emerged. But 3 days later, a classified storage facility deep within Dominion space went offline. No signs of breach. No alarms triggered. Just an interior message scrawled in one of Earth's ancient dead languages, painted in plasma burn on the wall: "We read everything." That incident, still under heavy classification, resulted in a suspension of all forward military operations against humanity. The recommendation wasn't driven by defeat. It was driven by uncertainty. Dominion control required predictability. But the humans offered none. Their behavior followed no doctrine. Their reactions defied logic. And worst of all, they seemed to prefer it that way. There were no projections of peace. No terms they demanded. No territory they sought. The conclusion was chilling and absolute. They are not a force to be reasoned with. They are a consequence to be avoided. The Dominion's final report on humanity was not routed through its usual military channels. It was submitted directly to the Strategic Continuity Council, bypassing traditional hierarchy. The contents were deemed volatile, dangerous not because of technological revelation or strategic breakdown, but because of what they revealed about the future. The humans were no longer an opponent. They were an inevitability. Every attempt to outpace them had failed. Every method to contain them had collapsed. But more than anything, the data made one thing painfully clear: humanity had already moved past this war. They were operating on a different time scale. Dominion forces viewed conflict as a cycle: engage, measure, escalate, resolve. Humanity didn't follow that structure. Their warfare didn't end when the fighting stopped. It adapted. Like a slow-burning infection beneath the surface of known space, they were no longer pressing borders. They were erasing patterns. Trade lanes rerouted. Communications lost. Patrols gone missing in otherwise empty sectors. The enemy hadn't pulled back. They'd gone quiet, and that silence wasn't peace. It was patience. The Dominion had relied for centuries on the assumption that time wore all enemies down. Insurgencies burned out. Rebellions collapsed under the weight of memory. But humanity had engineered its culture to be immune to forgetting. Every loss became a seed. Every humiliation a monument. They didn't move on. They evolved it. Integrated it. Weaponized it. Their ships were just tools. Their soldiers just expressions. The real war was in the way they remembered, the way they waited, and the way they returned when you least expected. That was what made them different. Most species went to war to win. Humans went to war to punish the idea of aggression itself. Their retaliation wasn't bounded by scope, fairness, or proportionality. If wronged, they struck not only the hand that hit them but the arm behind it, the voice that ordered it, and the home it came from. Not immediately. Not with fanfare. But with a cold certainty that the target would never sleep again without wondering if tonight was the night a Terran ghost came knocking. Their intelligence networks were equally terrifying. They didn't just gather data, they listened. Not to intercept plans, but to understand behavior. They didn't care about decoding encrypted strategy. They studied rhythm, emotional cadence, the moments where commanders hesitated. One Dominion admiral, who'd never even fought a human ship, was found dead with his entire fleet computer system disabled. The last recovered file showed an anonymous message auto-triggered by a specific phrase he'd used during a training exercise: "You assume we're done watching." That's how they operated now. Invisible, abstract, untraceable. They had become folklore within the Dominion's own ranks. Recruits were told horror stories that weren't entirely fiction, stories of ghost fleets that struck only once and left no survivors. Tales of ships that broadcast ancient Earth music seconds before impact, just to remind the enemy that they could have stayed silent. These weren't tactics. They were messages, written not to the present but to history itself. Even captured artifacts defied analysis. A wrecked drone recovered from a skirmish site showed signs of self-replicating code so complex that the Dominion's best AI couldn't predict its next operation cycle. The drone wasn't damaged in battle. It was left behind. Its internal logs were blank. Its memory core wiped clean. But carved into the inner plating, in microscopic etching, was a human phrase: "We leave pieces of ourselves where we've been. Eventually, you'll know the shape of us." The Dominion's top anthropologists began writing new threat models, not military, but civilizational. They now believed that humanity had transcended war as a mere act of force. It had become ritual. Every battle a form of testimony. Every casualty a signature. The humans had passed the point of needing to win. Now, they only needed to be known. And that kind of enemy couldn't be defeated. It could only be endured. Or avoided entirely. Plans to contain them were abandoned. Zones marked Terran-advised no-fly began appearing on strategic maps. Dominion vessels refused to enter sectors with recent Terran signals. Not out of command, out of instinct. The fear was no longer calculated. It was cultural. Soldiers didn't need orders to stay away. The idea of encountering a human ship was enough to create operational hesitation across entire battle groups. Morale dropped at the mere mention of Terran movement. One Dominion diplomat tried a final gesture. An unarmed emissary ship was sent toward the last known Terran-patrolled sector, carrying a message of neutrality and mutual disengagement. It was not attacked. It was not answered. It was simply turned around. No weapon fire. No transmission. Just a course correction, executed remotely. The message was clear. They weren't interested in peace. They were interested in space. Not territory. Not ownership. Just silence. Humans didn't want to rule. They wanted to be left alone, and if they weren't, they made sure no one forgot the price of intrusion. That wasn't politics. It was philosophy. A lesson carved in reactor heat and plasma scars. The final note in the Dominion archive wasn't a conclusion. It was a warning. Authored not by a general, but by a cultural liaison assigned to observe Terran behavior. Her report was simple and unembellished. "You think they're angry now," she wrote. "You think they're reacting to our presence. You're wrong. They're not just responding to us. They're preparing for something we haven't seen yet. Something bigger. I don't think they're evolving for us. I think we were just the beginning." That entry closed the file. No response was drafted. No strategy updated. The Dominion, for all its reach and arrogance, had finally met something that couldn't be cornered, understood, or subdued. The last human dreadnought was never found again. But its message was still circling in the void, broadcast from unmanned relays, repeating in every major Dominion language. "We didn't start this. But we'll finish it. And we won't need to do it twice."